When I was in the 3rd grade, I was going to write a screenplay. Not just any screenplay, I was going to write a screenplay for Star Wars Episode 7, The Story of Joey Skywalker. It was my epic, my magnum opus, and I had pages of outlines and concept art written at recess and during math lessons. I liked the idea of my story existing within a universe that I already loved, that already had an iconic look and feel. But you're like, what's that have to do with video games? And nobody gives a shit about your fan fiction. To which I'd say, yes, they do. With the rise of what my media professor liked to call Web 2.0, there came the rise of user-generated content. Everyone now gives a shit about my fan fiction. Everyone gives a shit about everyone's fan fiction, and terrible fan theories, and boring video essays about Mario RPGs. Wait, that's my video. People like to make things out of other things. But unlike films and art before them, video games exist within a culture that encourages user interaction. I mean, there's a dynamic relationship between developer and player, and those players like to play developers. I'm not talking about modders, even though those are important. Modders have like a real, legitimate understanding of the guts of how games work. I'm talking about when developers give players the tools to make their own stuff in the world of their games. I'm talking about me, Joe Lunchpail, the guy who knows nothing about game design but pretends he does to look cool on the internet. I like when games let me make stuff. There are whole titles built around this. I mean, every middle schooler with a YouTube channel has made giant statues of male genitalia in Minecraft, and Terraria is a game that exists, I guess. But even titles like Animal Crossing aren't games that you can build everything from a molecular level, but they still let you make something that feels personal and different from other players. These experiences are yours and yours alone, not because you choose to follow a different path, but because you put in the work and built something unique. That's pretty rad, but on the other hand, there are games that have like a minor mode or aspect that blossoms into something integral to the experience. This includes letting me use my own face. When I got a PS4, I anxiously drove to Target and picked up a copy of Fallout 4, a game that I had been waiting to play for over a year. And when I popped it in and updated it, I spent hours attempting to accurately create my face so I could wander through the Commonwealth. This was so much cooler than the relatively limited tools from the previous games. I mean, where else am I going to be able to play as Danny Trejo? Personally, I'm of the mind that this work is undone by having a more linear and cinematic storyline where the main character is, voice acted. While story-driven games can and should have voiced protagonists, RPGs that are based around creating your own stories and experiences always feel a little weird to me when they voice their protagonists. I get that it's more accessible, and what fucking geek wants to play a game where he has to read, but still, it immediately makes me feel like I'm playing someone else's character. Like, I know I just badmouth all those weak customization options from older Fallout titles, but those games still make me feel more involved in the world because I'm the one making the dialogue choices and decisions, not someone who sounds like John Hamm.
War never changes.
Nonetheless, 9 times out of 10, good character customization is something I love. But I also like a good old-fashioned map creator mode, one that allows me, someone who's not a game designer, to take a good old-fashioned crack at it with a bag full of reused assets and a handful of themes. The Tony Hawk franchise had a ton of these, and 10-year-old me liked to just lower the height of all the blocks and then name the level Hell. Say what you will about my fanfiction, but I wasn't a very creative kid. There's a challenge that comes with designing your own skate parks because the movement between ramps and rails has to feel natural, especially in the Tony Hawk series, which is all about insane combos and flow. You can't just throw a fuckload of rails in a half pipe and just hope for the best. If you really want to make a good level, it helps to plan ahead. While we can't have the intricacies or any of the verticality that comes with a lot of the Tony Hawk games, there is an opportunity to see just how much work goes into making like an actual place worth skating. American Wasteland has kind of a personal but also scripted version of a user-generated level in its Skate Ranch, a place that changes based on what missions you do and what pieces of infrastructure you steal. While it isn't as personal as the standard level editor, it allows for the flow and competency that comes from professionally designed levels but still feels like it belongs to you. And speaking of belonging to you, there's a handful of games on the PS3 that are entirely built around, the things you built. The biggest and best one was ModNation Racers, obviously, the greatest kart racer I've never played. Besides basically populating its races with fully customizable Mighty Mugs, those Mighty Mugs things, right? It also lets you build your own hellish tracks to make your friends hate you. But the real PlayStation customization powerhouse is Little Big Planet, which is probably the most ahead of its time video game thingy that PlayStation has ever done. It does the whole Mario Maker thing years before Mario did the Mario Maker thing, and it did the Yoshi's Crafted World thing before Yoshi did the whole Yoshi's Crafted World thing. It was chock full of really crazy, really weird, and really cool stuff that people actually made. It's almost a development engine, which is funny because the developers of Little Big Planet Media Molecule would go on to develop basically a game engine that is Dreams. Someone's remaking Metal Gear Solid in that, and that's pretty damn cool. Little Big Planet is cute and fun and had such an active, creative community that liked to make things that would kill you, and while it didn't have like a billion YouTubers playing through their user levels or whatever, it still has some good, wholesome content that made for a pretty darn cool community. And while there's obviously Mario Maker, Nintendo had been letting you make your own stuff as far back as Mario Paint on the Super Nintendo and WarioWare DIY on the DS. And while Mario Paint in particular is pretty much just literally a Mario version of Microsoft Paint with some extra Mario charm, WarioWare DIY is complicated. But once you get the hang of it, it's entirely possible to make like actually competent microgames to force your friends to play on the bus. Now, if you're thinking I'm qualified to talk about Halo, then you're wrong. That's more of Dakota's thing. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't spend my fair share of time running around in Duck Hunt, a genre of custom maps involving a group of people running through an obstacle course while one or two people on another team snipe them from above. Halo 3 and on, with its forges and custom match building, allowed for an incredible amount of creative game design to emerge, which is like super awesome. It's not as dynamic as any other game on this list, but the amount of limited options in the incredibly massive community full of bored people drinking Mountain Dew and not getting laid very much allowed for some really cool options. And while I'm mostly admiring this mode from afar, it seems like Forge has grown alongside the multiplayer Halo community, and that's pretty great. I mean, Duck Hunt alone basically creates a form of asymmetrical multiplayer that we'd see in popular titles like Evolve and the Friday the 13th game nearly 10 years later. And I mean Griffball. Like, come on, who could forget about Griffball? These kind of tools aren't in place in order to make players become game designers. They're here to just let people create. They're not a drawing pad, but a coloring book, or like a box of Legos. I'm not physically melting down the plastic to make the Lego pieces that I'm gonna build with. I went to Target and I bought one of those Lego creator things that has like directions for 10 different things, but is mostly there to encourage you to build your own thing. This metaphor isn't really working well, but the sentiment is the same. Neversoft and Bungie and all of these people took a bucket of Legos and slammed them in front of you, but when you dug through the box, you realized that they were just Halo Legos. And like, people make some really cool stuff with the relatively limited tools they've been given, which is strangely inspiring because maybe that one kid at camp with a Switch won't ever be a game designer, but he might. And maybe it started with him playing Mario Maker, which is pretty damn cool.